You looking at a young black king.
Astro project, blast of a tech, pass your neck with the shit to leave a rapper and Rex from the back of a black Acura. Bullet ricocheted and swayed and it passed through your pecs. The assassin went. All y'all know y'all don't have to go. Sawed off shoddy, make you potty, probably call the law. Me no gangster, I'm no tough, got me child of the most high. I get on the mic and you go, bye bye. Devil don't test me, I throw shrapnel where your chest be. Shooting our family down in the streets, fuck the police, they ain't marching for me. Pull up, not that Rari, I ain't bad yet. I pull up out that 85% of mass at. I put this on God, bad black is so hard. Bitch, I'm going back to Harlem in my West African garb.
Alafia, Jamayamboka, ETM Hotel, Rennie Sean. Welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into this episode of Masa Warrior Clan YouTube channel. We are dealing with the miseducation of black boys. The lecture. This is part 2. In part 1, we dealt with a lecture that was done back in 2009 to bring up the relevance of today, and we added Dr. Amos Wilson and Carter G. Woodson into the discussion, just to give it some more insight. But as you're coming in, please like the show, share the show, tell a friend. If you're catching a replay, appreciate you catching a replay. Please hit the like button and share the show. Before we get going, I do want to thank everybody for supporting the Kofi Pie-Side research team, which is the other research group that's separate from the Masa Warrior Clan, and also supporting the Masa Warrior Clan. Although Kofi and I are members of the Kofi Pie-Side research team, people kind of confuse it and muddy the two together, but they're different. The Kofi Pie-Side research team is a collective. You have me, Kofi, Satep and Ra. You have Chavis, you have Sutek, right? And you have T'Challa. That's the Kofi Pie-Side research team. The Masa Warrior Clan, you have Aziz, Amin Ma'at Ra, JC or Kung Fu. You have Fortune, Nahisi. You have you have Black Panther. That's the Masi. So we don't want to get them confused. But peace, brother Marlon. How you doing today, this evening, man? We're gonna get started here in just a moment. I'm just trying to share the show, get a couple people in the building so that we can continue the conversation from yesterday and get it cracking. Hopefully, I know people are either busy, you know what I mean, or traveling, or it's Turkey Day for a lot of people, and or Turkey Eve for a lot of people, and they're trying to get with their families, and they might be eating, drinking, playing games, whatever. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Quality time with their family and friends. Or somebody else might be live and they might be shooting the ish with other people. I did see some pseudo live on one of the streams, but I don't want to get into that. But as you're coming in, though, please like the show, share the show. And we're going to get through the rest of this lecture. And just to pivot off that, we ended identifying what American, what it actually meant to be an American. And for many people, they don't know how to find what American is or American culture is. It's pretty much muddy. And as African Americans, we tend to try to justify some things based on our plight because of our struggles that brought us here. We tend to try to justify what being an American means. Well, the professor argues that being an American means being a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I'm gonna run that by you again. For all the people that's arguing in favor of America, that means you're in favor of wanting to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That is the cultural identity of an American. Peace, everything is everything. But again, I'm gonna repeat, I'm gonna keep saying this. what we've identified in part one of this particular lecture is that being, what up, Omar? Being an American means being a white Protestant, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That is the identifying marker culturally for an American. So when people are arguing for identity, right, or trying to understand the cultural nuances that are looped into everything, we have to be very careful as Africans, African Americans, right? Because our ancestry takes us back to the continent of Africa. And then you have people that are arguing from an indigenous perspective saying that they were already here. How so, Sway? So it ends up being what it is from that perspective. But just identifying what it is to be an American is a big step for a lot of people that they're unprepared to deal with. Because I've asked on several shows, what is it to be an American? What is it? Define what American is. And they have yet to define it. Therefore, the perfect definition for what being an American is WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That is the cultural identity. So, uh, to get this point in before we get ready to get back into the lecture, as people are beginning to come in, peace online, peace from West Africa. Please, y'all, like the show, share the show, tell a friend, get the people in the building. We're just gonna pick up to where we were yesterday. And I don't know if anybody really much caught yesterday's build or if you're behind. And as you're coming in, I'm just bringing people up to speed with this identity crisis that we're in the middle of, but also the miseducation of our Black boys and why this identity plays a role in that. So I talked about yesterday in the conversations that I had that I was pulling from to add on to the actual lecture, history and its importance in this particular conversation, especially for young African Americans. History is a time dimension. History structures time. I frequently try to point out that culture is not only about behavior, dress, and so forth, but that all cultures have a time dimension related to them. I talk about this relative to education of our children to indicate that our children are often flunked and destroyed by the time structure of the schools they attend. Who told us that classes only have to last 45 minutes? Oh, the white folks teach theirs 45 minutes, but that apparently is a time system that's connected to and works for them. That is in some way intimately connected to their history and experience. When we look at ourselves, are we going to tell ourselves that our children are destroyed by the after effects of our enslavement, Jim Crowism, miseducation, poor self image, all the other things we moan and groan about, and yet we don't make time in a curriculum for instructing them so as to remove those obstacles to learning? If not, then we will destroy them. Therefore, our time system for teaching our children cannot be a duplicate of the European time system. We must recognize there's a time dimension related to our history and ourselves as a people. In knowing our history, we get to know our time dimension. We get to know how much time has to be dedicated to various tasks if we are to achieve what we need to achieve. Forget about other people's time. Who gives us a hoot about whether our children are reading ahead or behind white children? Who told us that they had to read the same thing at the same time, at the same age? If they have a different history, a different experience, different goals, and different ways, then doesn't it stand to reason that they may be achieving different milestones at different times, but it's the very fact that we try to impose the time system of another people upon our children that creates the so-called deviations we complain about so much, and our children are destroyed in the process. So when we let another people write history, and history as in an arbitrary division of time, they define us within that division of time. So when we see European history talking about World War I, World War II, etc., that's not the only way to divide up time in terms of wars. No, we have been at war with European continuously for at least 2,000 years, a non-stop war. But when we internalize European division of time, it takes us away from our own history and from understanding our own adversarial relationships with them and other people, and takes us completely outside of ourselves. Therefore, history as mythology, even if it tells the truth, by the very fact of instructing of time, can still be used as propaganda to manipulate and create an unreality in consciousness. See, European history to a considerable degree attempts to control consciousness by the way it represented. We saw a movie called The Birth of a Nation. Why not The Death of a Nation? Indigenous American so-called Indian nations existed at that time. At the same time we speak of the birth of some nations, other nations were dying. But we are focused on their so-called birth. Even more precarious than this is the fact that many of our people feel as if they do not come into existence and self-consciousness until they have been recognized by European history. So Columbus discovers America, and it's almost as if the Indians come into reality and into self-consciousness as the result of Columbus' discovery. But that time they were nothing, dead. And many of us still have the deep psychology that we are invisible people until white folks recognize that we exist. It's a heavy psychology that rules us today. We are not famous until they make us famous. We are not anything until they make us something. Before that, we are nothing. History as a propaganda, history as mythology brings into consciousness. History by Europeans is seen as a validation of truth. It establishes authority. It's a public situation. As I've often pointed out to my students, that we use as arbiters of truth those who have lied to us most. These are the kinds of contradictions that keep us crazy, and they are widespread. Consequently, we can only feel it is truth when it comes out of the European historical solely. It's Dr. Amos Wilson right there. Time. So this plays a very important role in the miseducation of Black boys. And what we're getting ready to see in part 2 of this particular lecture. Remember, we ended on a bill regarding identity. We talked about the school systems and how our children are lagging behind. He talked about the cultural perspective or worldview cemented in how our young Black boys see the rest of the world and how they always end up in bad situations in these educational systems. So there's a lot of learning that actually takes place in this particular parts. So let's change this up a little bit, then we're going to get right into the bill. Let me get my screen shared, and we're going to come back to that time.
2 minutes. I'll give you 3 because this is a tougher topic. Define your ethnic identity. And you cannot say American. All right? You can say WASP, but you cannot say American. Go. Now, just to let you know, we're truncating. This ends up being about 90-minute conversation in a full day, because a lot comes out of that in terms of people talking about their identification. I do want to, well, I can't go back, but oh yes, I can. What notice the last identity is age, because there is a culture that comes with your age that we talk about. And what that means is that you do certain things culturally just simply based on how old you are, you know. And sometimes, though, we confuse that with the other identities. Remember, it's confusion. So we're saying, we're trying to get you to carve out very specifically what is my ethnic makeup, if you will, that I can take out of a generational identity or take out of a geographic identity. Meaning that if you subscribe to Black culture, there is a commonality among people who subscribe to Black culture across the country, regardless if you're from LA, New York, Boston, or Alabama, right? There's a commonality different from an aged identity that comes with people who may be in their 30s, right? And they grew up in the age of high top fades, whatever, right? Whatever it is, you know, there's some link there, but that link might not be related to the ethnic identity more so than it is to the age identity. And sometimes they cross. And it's just knowing how these things apply that strengthens us. But I think also not knowing leads to confusion. So your cultural identity is very complicated because we have to really understand what culture is. We always start off with metaphors and analogies. For me, PhD means how many metaphors can you come up with, right? And make it work, okay? Because I try them out and then my family goes, that is not a good metaphor right there. It does not work. So I'm like, okay, how about this one, right? But Wade Noble said it very well. He said, culture is to humans as water is to fish. And it is the lens that we see the world is through that cultural lens. And similar to how fish need their own water to survive, right? We all have our aquarium stories of, killing off some fish. Part of the reason why is because we took them out of their water. I know I did, I'll admit it. Okay, the first time I took the fish out of the water to clean the tank, right? Put them back in. The next day, they were what? Dead. And then I called and I said, you sold me some really bad fish. What happened? And he started laughing once I explained, right? So you're supposed to leave the fish in the water, clean the tank, or keep them in their water. And that's the same thing here. The full analogy, a full metaphor that he uses is this. We're trying to put saltwater fish in plain water tanks in terms of our school system. And these students, a lot of students of color, are being put in those plain water tanks and they're not having success. So what must we do? Add some salt to the tank. Right? That's the analogy that Wade Nobles uses. We use this working definition by Villegas and Lucas that comprises, for me, the sort of totality of culture. Identifiable community or group that uses a certain language, a certain way of interaction with one another, how you take turns to talk, how you relate to time and space, and how you approach learning. All involved around patterns for us define what we mean in terms of this culture, okay? And in terms of this ethnic identity, if you will, when we say culture. When it comes to African Americans and these groups that we talked about, though, remember I said there's not a validation and a legitimacy. So these are all the precepts, if you will, or categories of culture put forth by Wade Nobles in the context of Black culture. And the question that we ask is, when you think of Black culture, honestly, do you think of all of this right here? Do you think of its complexity? Or do you think of hip hop and pelvic gyrations? Do you think of certain types of foods? Do you think of movies? You know, it bothers me when we talk about Black culture and we just name Black actresses. And that's the length of our culture. Or we talk about music, or we talk about certain foods. When the complexity of any culture is here. All cultures have this, and it's all relative to the culture. How does this play out in terms of stereotypes and generalizations? Well, if you understand Black culture, you understand that it is a culture of hard work. working hard, having a strong work ethic. It's in our history. It's in our families. It's in who we are to work hard. If you listen to the mainstream and to the institution in terms of our boys, what do we hear about them as being what? Lazy. That's a stereotype. That's a stereotype. Because culturally speaking, we are a hardworking culture, period. And this notion of laziness does not apply. And how do I know? Well, take me to where they are motivated. Take me to where they have an interest. Take me to where they are being responsive. And you're not going to see laziness. You're going to see hard work. But if I come to the classroom, if I come to the system believing that these kids are lazy culturally, then we have what's known as that self-fulfilling prophecy, or we begin to act out that belief. You're not going to be nothing. You can't write. You can't read. You're not going to do this. And then all of a sudden, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Versus you can write. You can do this. I'm not going to take, I was in this classroom last week, and this is a very simple example, but it speaks to high expectations. It was homeroom. It was guidance. The students are coming in. They're wearing uniforms. This teacher, African-American teacher, she made every one of them young boys tuck their shirts in. Every single one of them. And she didn't let down. And she told them, you are a scholar. You are a student. You have to look like a scholar. You have to look like a student. Tuck your shirt in. And every single one of those boys tucked their shirts in. That's the high expectations that we need in terms of belief system. She's telling them, you are important. You are a student. You are a scholar. Look that look. Now, some people say, well, that's a little thing, but that could go a long way in the long run. What about respect? If we listen to mainstream media, if we listen to what we get from the institution, then you would think in Black culture, we don't respect Black women. That's what you would think. Because we're going on hip hop, which the mainstream media has replaced for Black culture, right? And there was Black culture. In fact, there was music before hip hop, right? Some people are disappointed to know that, but it was, okay? Because of the nature of hip hop, some of it is a disrespect, misogynistic lyrics and such on. We have extrapolated to be represented. But if you know anything about Black culture, what do you know about respecting the Black female? Let's put it like this. If I even form my lips, even just begin to articulate the sound of disrespecting a Black female, I would not be with you here today, period. Because a shoe or a brick or something would come upside my head immediately. You don't disrespect. You open the door. You go help with the groceries. You help with the luggage. That's in the culture. So when these students are walking around calling females out of the name, you have to look them dead in the eye and to say, that's not who you are. That's not who you are. You're not 50 Cent. You're not whomever. You're not whomever. You are somebody's grandson. You are somebody's son. And I don't think if your mom or your sister came up here, you would want them to be called like that. And I've never had a student say, I don't care. You call my mom whatever you want to call her. Never heard that. You can call my sister. No, never heard that. But it's how we're going at them. See how y'all talk? That's how y'all do it in your community, huh? That's how y'all talk to women. But we don't talk like that here. That's the belief system. How you going to say we don't talk like that here, but that's how we, it's not true anyway. That's not how we talk in our community. So this is what we mean by the complexity. And if we're going to change in terms of achievement gap, we got to change how we're believing of the students. And if that change is to come about, we got to see things more on the cultural lines versus the racial lines. Then there is what I call the depth of it in terms of what we call cultural determinations. And these are things that are culturally connected through anthropological study. It's not just related to Black culture. It's a study of all cultures. How they greet one another is culturally based, right? So that soul shake is not something that I got off of Good Times, right? It was something that was done in my family by my uncles, my granddad, so on and so forth. That was taught to me. But at the same time, I was taught the mainstream handshake. And my uncle would say, when you're talking to the man, this is how you shake his hand. And he demonstrated the mainstream handshake, right? But when you're at home, when you're in the community, it's the soul shake or the Black man's hug. I don't go to grandma's house and give her the mainstream handshake because she's going to say, boy, what are you doing? Right? You reach that hand up. It's not going to work. Eye contact is culturally based. It's culturally based, right? The anthropological study is this. Every culture, is all relative, has a certain length of time that it's appropriate to look in someone's eyes. Okay? And it varies. In some cultures, for example, a lot of European cultures, it's appropriate to gaze and look long, deep into somebody's eyes. And it sends a message of respect or disrespect. Respect, interest, intrigue. That's the message. In other cultures, sometimes you look at someone and you look away. Is that respect or disrespect? Respect. In the culture, and so take it in a school. You have some Asian students or some Latino students, they'll look at the teacher, then they'll look away. And it's a sign of respect. But in a culture of school, it's a sign of what? Disrespect. And the teacher will say, look at me when I'm talking to you. But the student is saying, in my culture, we don't look at you. We look away. Right? That's what we call cultural misunderstanding. It's a cultural misunderstanding. In Black culture, you look long, you look wrong. Because it sends a message of what? Disrespect. Disrespect. Right? It sends a message of confrontation. And so what I'm trying to get you to understand is this is not from hip hop. This is not from TV. This is culturally based, passed down from generation to generation. I can get off any plane anywhere in the country, and I know if it's a young brother on a jetway or whatever, I can't stare him down. Why? Because culturally, I'm sending a message of disrespect. And if he subscribes to Black culture, he's going to say, what's up? What you looking at? Why are you looking at me that way? Right? That's cultural. We put it in the context of school, though. We teach the look as a means of classroom management, right? That's mama's look. Means you cut and say, you better stop what you're doing right now. But what teachers need to understand that if you look too long, then you look wrong, and the student is going to respond culturally. The student is going to say to the teacher, what? What you looking at? Why are you looking at me? She always got her eyes on me. The teacher's going to say, get out. Why? Disrespectful, defiant, deviant. Because the teacher is saying in the context of school, the cultural appropriate thing is I can look at you. But the student is saying, but in my culture, you stare me down. We got a cultural misunderstanding. And this is what leads to the disapportionment of the detentions, referrals, suspensions. This is why, because of these cultural misunderstandings. A lot of these students end up in the office, and when you ask them, why are you here? They say, I don't know. I just said, what you looking at? She sent me out. They don't have an understanding. So what we have to develop is this cultural sensitivity around the teacher understanding that I got to time my look. I have to use proximity, but guess what? I can't get too close because space is a cultural norm as well. In some cultures, you can get up in somebody's face. In other cultures, it's inappropriate. It's rude. So the students are going to say what? Get out of my face. Why are you in my face? And what is the teacher going to say? Get out. Because in school, this is my space, and I can get in your face. Did you hear me, mister? Right? And the students are like, get out of my face. Get out. Okay? So we have to come to an understanding and recognize these behaviors for what they are. And we think that will lead to not sending them out of the room, but teaching situational appropriateness. What does that mean? That means that the student recognizes, oh, I'm in school. That means that she's going to be looking at me. And I got to code switch. I have to code switch, right? And once they learn that lesson, they're going to be on the road to success. Because all of us, to make it through the education system, had to learn how to code switch on one level or another. Right? And the students who are not having success are not code switching. And this is what Lisa Delpit talks about when she says explicit instruction. That's the explicit instruction she's talking about. Some of those students, they don't get that transaction there. They don't get that how we relate to one another. I always use the example of interacting with policemen, right? And in my experience, I have never looked at the policemen when they're talking to me as a form of disrespect in a way. right? But some police, they will say, sir, I need you to look at me. And at that particular moment, I got to make a decision. I got to make a decision. I got to make a decision if I'm going to code switch or am I going to continue to be, in essence, in terms of the mainstream culture, quote unquote, defiant, right? So I go, right? Or something like that. Okay. All right. That's how this works. But it has to be automatic and it has to be done in a way where you don't have to give up who you are. Another thing that's cultural, a lot of people don't know, is how we hold conversation and that period of what the linguists call overlap. Overlap is the space or time when I stop talking and it's appropriate for the other person to start talking, right? And it is varied by culture. In some cultures, there's a big space. That means I stopped talking 1001, 1002, 1003. Now you can start talking. I'll make my point, 1001, right? Then it goes, right? It fluctuates, okay? So in Black culture, look, it's no space. It's called jumping in, that you have to have the ability to jump in. If you don't have the ability to jump in, then you won't get into the conversation. Okay? Right? Now, students come to school with this intact culturally, right? And what happens is they're penalized in school because they begin jumping in. And in school, jumping in is considered what? Rude, interrupting. Now, what I wanted to do is I want to give an example of how we take that cultural norm, go to where the students are, but put it into an instructional strategy. In your packets there, we're just going to read, just because of time, we're just going to read 2 pages. We're not going to read the whole thing. And we have some extras here, you know, help you up there. But I want to read from page 13. Their eyes are watching God. This is where the strips came from. And if you don't have a packet, just kind of look on with someone. Their eyes are watching God. This is Zora Neale Hurston's, premier piece. And she writes in African American language, if you will, right? And this is where the strips came from. But I want to do a reading activity with you that's called jump in reading, right? That builds on what we just talked about culturally. In jump in reading, here are the rules. Rule number 1, I'm the master jumper inner. That means I can jump in at any time, all right? Rule number 2, you're not going to be prompted to read. You can just jump in, but you must jump in at a period stop. You have to jump in at a period stop. You can't jump in at another punctuation, line break. It has to be a period. If you jump in, I need you to read at least 3 sentences. All right. Now, two or more people may jump in at the same time, and in that case, we'll defer to the one who jumped in first, and I'll make the call if necessary. All right. We're just going to read from the first 2 pages. We're not going to do the whole thing. I'll start reading, and at some point, I'll stop, or I want somebody to jump in. Okay, and then read loud so everyone can hear you. Ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. A little louder.
Now we're not gonna be able to hear, but real quick, I wanna kind of chime into what's going on here, just to kind of bring people up to speed. The thought process behind the miseducation of Black boys and the perspective and the path that has been taken, it's been set long ago. This is why I said what I started off with Amos Wilson when he talked about history, how important history was, the timeline, how important time was, knowing who we are, how important that was, the cultural identity of ourselves by knowing those things. And then here, as we get the professor, he's talking about these cultural nuances among Black people and Black community, as far as when people look a certain way, look at you a certain way, or how long they look at you, and the way those things are perceived, and so forth, and how he didn't look at police officers because he didn't want the police officers to see it as a sign of disrespect, and so on and so forth, or how he would get off a plane, and if he looked at another dude too long, they're gonna be like, what you looking at? Those things. And then he talks about how the school system is and how it plays a role, it plays a part. Those are intricate pieces. This is all a part of the miseducation of the Negro, not just the black, well, the black boys, all that, but the Negro in general. And because of the games that we have been played or played along with, we don't understand these things. We only try to understand what we think that we could understand from their worldview. So when we look at history, we're not looking at history from our worldview. We're looking at history from other people's worldview because we're on their time. We're fixated with them being accurate and us not being so accurate. We're fixated with uh this term that has been deemed blackology in certain instances when people are challenging the status quo because they don't want to stick to Eurocentric worldview, calendars, and time. And here we are in the middle of important conversations trying to advance knowledge, and then history is then now doesn't need context. And then we're here because other people sold us. Those things, I'm not trying to have a conversation or discussion about those things, but I'm trying to make it register to everybody that can hear my voice right now. Like, we're having irrelevant conversations with no context, with no cultural nuances from someone else's worldview, and we're not even understanding the other side of the argument at all because context is irrelevant here. Or having this or having some type of methodology is not important here. But that's not how you advance knowledge. You can't advance knowledge that way. There's methods for all of that, and you have to stick to the methods in order to bring things forth. For instance, I just can't start cutting a person's hair a particular way and then thinking that it's going to look the way he envisioned it when he pointed to a picture when I asked him how did he want his hair cut. There is a method for cutting a skin fade. There's a method for a light fade. There's a method for a taper fade. There's a method for all different kind of mohawks, all different kind of cuts. You'll use as a barber, you'll use a proper method to administer your artwork on a person's head, but you won't take that same method and apply it when it comes to your studies. And we're just going to take everybody at face value. So there's no vetting the sources, no cross-referencing, there's nothing. And then there's problems with Afrocentricity as a methodology, and then not really fully understanding what Afrocentricity is actually implying here. All of this plays a role in the miseducation of our Black boys and the Negro in general. This is what I'm trying to get y'all to see here. And then you hear outlandish things like we're Americans. No, we're descendants of people who were kidnapped from the continent. So we are African because of that. Our experience makes us very much so African. Our DNA, our lineage tells us that we're African. But we're American because of that Holocaust that we've experienced. But we don't even know what it is to be an American because we don't know what American is. It was a fictitious thing until in recent history, very recent history. We ain't even talking 300 years ago, 350, 400 years ago, not even four. We could just leave it like that. Like, realistically, ladies and gentlemen, like, this idea of what America is or what American culture is fictitious. Unless you subscribe to what he told these people to do earlier in the video. You cannot use such and such. You can only use WASP because that is American culture. WASP. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. That is the nucleus of American identity and culture. So we have to be very careful the way we have conversations, the way we advance knowledge, the way we look at our history, and whose timeline are we on versus others. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, because if we stick to the outline of someone else who never had our experience, then we're subjecting ourselves to their interpretation of our history. So what am I getting at? If I'm not looking at the continent and I'm seeing whose involvement played a role in what scenario, whichever that I want to draw up, but I'm gonna look at external sources and not internal sources, I've handicapped myself to complete biases and interpretation of data, who can't even get into the mindset of what it is to go through what just happened to them. I'm gonna give you one even better. You have a European coming to ancient Kemet, infusing their idea of what religion is to them onto people who've actually had a different experience than that person. That cultural marker can't be infused by E.A. Wallace Budge on ancient Kemet. He can't be, because he pretty much he uses the Abrahamic faith or the Christian faith to actually try to draw similarities among the Remech, the Egyptians, and their systems that played a role in their culture. The That can't happen. You see what I'm saying? I don't think that y'all understand that that can't happen. Like, he can't be the deciding factor or the conclusion to something that he's never identified with. He doesn't and never had that experience. But other Africans can, because they've had that experience. They have the nuances. Like, all right, does Vanilla Ice know what it's like to be Ice Cube? Does Vanilla Ice know what it's like to be Ice Cube? Kimoya, your mom said, oh, okay, she listening? Peace to your mom. I know there's a delay, but I want to know, does Vanilla Ice know what it's like to be Ice Cube? If you say that he does, please explain to me how. Please explain to me. How does he know what it's like to be Ice Cube? Did he grow up in South Central? Was he a part of any gang violence or surroundings? What about drug dealings, gunshots, carjackings, robberies, on your way to school? Being racially profiled by the Japanese or Koreans, especially the police? Going to a school with teachers who just there to pick up a paycheck and not there to educate the kids at all? What about single parenting? No father in the household, just the mother. She's working, she's never home. So there's no home cooked meal when you come home. It's just you when you come through the door. And forbid somebody follows you into your home, are you prepared to defend yourself? So I want to know, can Vanilla Ice, you see what I'm saying? Oh, yeah, shout out to your moms, man. Appreciate that. So let's just get back to the lecture, man. Remember this. Everything that I'm saying has everything to do with the miseducation of a Negro as a whole, but more importantly, our black boys. Let me add something real quick. The study of history cannot be a mere celebration of those who struggled on our behalf. We must be instructed by history and should transform history into concrete reality, into planning and development, into construction of power and the ability to ensure our survival as a people. If not, Black History Month becomes an exercise in the inflation of egos. It becomes an exercise that cuts us further off from reality. Ironically, we now see even other people who are not our friends joining us in this celebration, which means that they must see in it some means of protection, of protecting their own interests, and seeing in it something that works for them and possibly against us. If they can celebrate our history and see it as something positive, then it means that we are not using it in a revolutionary sense. They do not see our study of it as a threat to their power. If we are not studying it in a way that is a threat to their power, then we are studying it incorrectly, and our celebration of it helping to maintain us in the state of deception. So let us make sure that we look at and study history in a light such that it advances our interests, not inflate our egos and blind us to reality.
How she feel. Town didn't do nothing in the bed on 30 his own self.
All right, he finna come back in because she about to end up reading.
TK ain't been no boy for some time. He around 30 his own self. She act like we done something to her. Pearl Stone complained. She the one been doing wrong. You mean you mad because she didn't stop and tell us all her business? Anyhow, what you ever know her to do so bad as y'all make out? The worst thing I ever knowed her to do was taking a few years off her age, and that ain't ever harmed nobody. Y'all makes me tired. The way y'all talking, you think the folks in this town didn't do nothing in the bed except praise the Lord. You have to excuse me because I'm bound to go take her some supper. Phoebe stood up sharply. Don't mind us, Lulu smiled. Just go right ahead. Us can mind your house for you till you get back. My supper's done. You better go see how she feel. You can let the rest of us know. Lord, Pearl agreed. I done scorched up that little meat and bread too long to talk about. I can stay away from my home long as I please. My husband ain't fussy. All right, we're going to stop there. And the reading activity was jump in reading. And what we're saying is you have students in the class who can jump in. Now we have a strategy that validates who they are. And they can say something that I do at home is now a plus at school versus being a minus. And it's incorporated into instruction. But we're not going to stay there. There are other reading strategies that we're going to introduce to transition them to more of what can be expected in academia. Okay. And that's important. We're not going to stay there. We're just going to start there. Also, now you got to read, you got to see what it feels like to read a non-standard language. And that feeling that you got reading that is the same feeling of someone trying to read standard English or academic language. And that is you have a certain oral proficiency. You are proficient in terms of your reading, but put a language in front of you that you are unfamiliar with, and then your reading level is rendered lower or slower. And that's the phenomenon that you experience in reading the African American language is the same phenomenon that students who are trying to learn standard English and academic language experience linguistically. All right. And that's going to transition us to talk about language here. And I'm going to start off with this video, I think, that gets you at why we think negatively about Ebonics, or why we think negatively about African American language, I think. I'm not sure this is going to be.
In 1996, the Oakland School Board tried to get Ebonics taught in schools. Members of the Oakland School Board agreed to label so-called Black English or Ebonics as a second language.
The introduction of Ebonics is what they're referring to. 96 in California.
So basically, it's like black speech. In the 70s, they called it jive. This is not a revolution. Ebonics to me was the dumbest idea ever. Maybe we should give people an example of Ebonics here. As far as the pronunciation goes, let's look at some examples. Hand becomes hand. Good becomes goo. And with becomes with.
The only example I remember is what you talking about? What is?
If I wanted to say, do you have any maple syrup human beatbox? I would say, hey, do you have maple syrup beatbox? You see, because I dropped some of the articles. Become the drum!
Food was a way of saying, you silly young man.
What? You talking about Willis?
What's up? Why y'all in my was a way of saying, cease and desist.
If I say I'm gonna kick your ass, you know what I'm talking about, right? You don't need to worry about Ebonics. Why isn't there any controversy over white Ebonics? Or just say Ibonics, Ibryonics? Yeah, dude, man, I think I got the squirts. That doesn't mean, hey, man, I'm going to use my squirt gun and spray you. It means, hey, man, I just ate some Taco Bell and I have diarrhea.
Jesus spoke Ebonics. Yes. John chapter 13, verse 19. He said, I be he.
All right. So we see how the mainstream media fools us into thinking deficit or ignorant through the misinformation, right? And if we just go on that, then that's where we get our notions of Ebonics or the non-standard languages. So the first thing we have to go to is the linguistic research, which is what we do. And the linguists are very clear that any characterization, I'm just going to skip it to the bottom here, any characterization of Ebonics as slang, mutant, lazy, defective, ungrammatical, or broken English is incorrect and demeaning. That it is seen as a linguistic system that is fundamentally irregular beyond vocabulary. That's key. It has to do with phonics, morphosyntax, grammar, rhetoric, or even pragmatics. You have to understand that language has 6 dimensions. One of the dimensions is known as the pragmatic dimension, or what is commonly known as the nonverbal cues, right? There are nonverbal cues that are tied linguistically, meaning how you may roll your eyes, move your neck, stand akimbo, whatever comes with your language. And this is important to understand the depth and complexity of it. It's not just vocabulary. It's not just vocabulary. There are 3 linguistic absolutes, and they're very simple, easy to remember. All language is good. There's no such thing as a bad language, linguistically speaking. There's no such thing as bad French. There's no such thing as street Spanish. There's no such thing as proper English. It's all good linguistically. When society comes and places a judgment on it, that's where we get the value. But in its purest form, it's good. All linguistic forms are rule governed and patterned. They're not made up. They're not hodgepodge. They're not random. They were not created by hip hop. There was African American language prior to hip hop. All right. And we acquired the language that's spoken in home by the primary caregiver. And whatever language that is, that's the language this child is going to come to school speaking at preschool at 4 years old or 3 years old or 5, or at kindergarten at 5. That's the language they're going to come speaking based on the primary caregiver's language. All right. Here's the technical definition of Ebonics. It wasn't coined in 1997 by Oakland. It was coined in 1973 in St. Louis by some black linguists who got together because they were tired of the deficit names that the white linguists had given to the language of Africans in America. So it's a 3-paragraph definition. It's just the first sentence. Ebonics is the linguistic and paralinguistic features which on a concentric continuum represent the communicative competence of the West African, Caribbean, and United States slave descendants of African origin. Problem with linguists is they write in ways that puts everybody to sleep, right? So we have to break it down. Ebonics, and I want to give it to you this way. I want to inform you so that you can inform others. And there are really just 3 quick points that you can make with others. Point number 1, Ebonics is a language family. It is not a singular language. It is a language family. It is an umbrella term that refers to all the languages that are spoken in the African diaspora. That's what it is. So it's really ignorant or misinformed to say, do you speak Ebonics? Because you wouldn't say, do you speak Romance? Or do you speak Indo-European? Why? Because those are families of languages. What are those languages? Well, that's the second point you can make. Those languages are connected to wherever the enslaved Africans were taken throughout the enslavement. Because when they got to that particular place in the world, they were given those constraints I told you about earlier. No African tongue, no working in groups, can't speak the language here. So the linguist said they simply took the words that they were hearing, laid them on top of the grammar that they were speaking, and formed, in essence, this hybrid language. That's known in Jamaica as a patois, Spanish and the West African base. That's known in Aruba as Dutch Pidgin. That's known in Haiti as French Creole. That's known in South America as Black Portuguese. That's known in Peru as Huerga. That's known in North America in Georgia as Geechee. That's known throughout the Western United States as African American language or Black English. And that's known in South Carolina as Gullah. All right. What is the commonality? The commonality is the same grammatical base. We go from country to country, it's the same rules. All right. Now, the third thing that you can point out is that why are you calling it a language? Because some people, they be tripping on that. They were calling it a language. Well, the reason why we're calling it a language, because the linguists tell us that, well, you know, if you want to define a language, you can define it as simply saying that if you have a big army, you speak a language. If you have a small army, you speak a dialect. Because our world history of languages tell us that there are some countries that when they were dominated, they spoke dialects. But when they gained independence, they spoke languages. So it's political. The second thing we know is that there is a regional variation to a language that becomes a dialect. So I can be speaking African American language with a Southern drawl, y'all, right? Or I can do my New Yorker accent, or I can bring it to Chicago, or I can like do this where we talk in LA like this all the time, right? But we're still speaking the same rules of the language. That means we're still using multiple negation. We're still using habitual be, although we're in different parts of the country. And the last part of this is very simple, that part of oppression is taking away somebody's language. It's telling them, you don't have a language. You don't have a culture. Your skin doesn't match ours. Your hair doesn't match ours. And getting us to think negatively about who we are, that's the process of oppression. And you don't even have to be there to oppress, because once the oppressed believe in what has been given, then the oppression will be carried out by themselves. And the oppressor can remove, and it will continue. And this, to a large extent, has happened. This is why you have some people who say, I don't speak no Ebonics, while they're using a multiple negation sentence there.
So recent linguistic studies define a language variously referred to as Black English, African American English, or more appropriately, Ebonics. This language has systemic rules different from English, as it is popularly learned and spoken. The cohesive grammar of Ebonics has features shared with popular English and other dialects of English. The most significant fact, however, is that some of these features are found only among Ebonics speakers. At least one researcher, Jatone Brewer, believes that systemic differences in Black English, which occur only within the language system, may be the result of interactions between the coastal West African languages of the Niger-Congo language family and the dialects of English encountered by Black people when they first arrived in America. In such a case, however, it is highly unlikely that no individualization of those unique systemic differences appeared in other dialects of English. The interaction of African languages with English dialects has not been shown to be significant in the singularity of certain grammatical rules present in Ebonics. A more plausible answer is that Ebonics contains structural remnants of certain African languages, even though the vocabulary is overwhelmingly English. If we accept the creolization theory that Ebonics developed as a result of a language interference, isolation factors, and non-popular linguistic models, then it is possible to trace the language from Pidgin to full coming to be another language. According to creolization theory, a Pidgin language is characterized by two factors. Its grammatical system is sharply reduced, and it is not the native language system of those who speak it. When Pidgin becomes the native language of those who use it, it becomes a Creole language. The language spoken by African Americans was greatly influenced by the phonological and syntactic structures of their first languages. Whatever semblance of English they learned had the unmistakable imprint of African languages, much as the English spoken by the average French person and rendered in many instances in terms of French phonology and syntax. These Africans were, for the most part, not linguistic learners, languages, but laypersons acquiring an instrument for their survival. And the limited English vocabulary and a few sentences needed for their task of staying alive were extremely useful in dealing with whites. But the mastery of English, morphology, and syntax lay in the future. Pidginization as a first step toward creolization occurs throughout the African's history in America. Morphological, phonological, and grammatical principles underlying popular English have constantly played havoc with the African past. The accompanying figure shows the process of structural retention in African American speech behaviors. In so much as African Americans are descendants of a great many ethnic and linguistic groups, it is necessary, if we are to talk about communication styles, constructions, or proverbial forms, to identify as precisely as possible the areas where most African American ancestors originated. Slave trade records provide us with information regarding areas from which slaves were taken. The Atlantic slave trade was permitted for nearly 200 years in the American colonies and the United States. Every state was affected at some point, although the majority of Africans landed in the southern states. The language spoken by most African linguistic groups are considered to be in the Niger-Congo family, which includes Bantu. Several similarities between these languages and Ebonics are so clearly observable as to deserve immediate mention. The verb system of effect and ewe differentiate between a customary aspect, habitual or repetitive aspect, and aspect of completion. Thus, it is possible in effect to express an action that occurs habitually in present, past, or future, with time determined by the context rather than vocal inflection. Ebonics also uses aspects rather than tense in some verbal constructions.
So I don't have time to go over the rules with you, but I want to give you one example of what I mean by the rules. But if you look in your packet, starting on page 20 and 21, you will see what we call a contrast of analysis chart, which are the Black English rules. And this is what's published in the Prentice Hall series, because in California, teachers have to address non-standard language issues in their teaching. It's in our education framework. So all of our textbook publishers have these elements in the textbooks for teachers who have students who speak non-standard languages. So it's part of the educational policy there. Okay. So if you take, for example, habitual be, Habitual be is the one that's made fun of, like she said at the end of the clip, I be he, right? If you go to West Africa and you study the be form, you recognize that the be form has what's known as an habituality use. It refers to things in an ongoing sense as over time, in terms of it's an existence. So if you really analyze I be he from the scriptural standpoint, the quote is I be he, but it's really saying, from, if you look at it from West African language, I am in essence everywhere. I am always in this existence. That's how it works. So in the language, you could say, she be late to work. Okay. So when you translate that to standard English, you must have an is or are verb plus the use of an adverb or adverbial phrase. That is the correct translation. So if I say she be late to work, someone translate based on what I just explained. That girl is always late to work. What am I listening for? The is and the always. Because that is the linguistic equivalent to the use of the be form. If you translate it to she late, or if I messed it up, if you translate it to she is late to work, that is an incorrect translation. Because the correct translation, I just gave it to you, is what? She late to work. So if I want to say present tense, like she late right now, I would say she late to work, right? But if I want to say just sit down, just have some coffee, because it's going to be a while, because she is always late to work, then I would say she be late to work. That's the accurate translation. If you understand this, it gives you a connection with the students, a rapport. It also empowers them. So if when the students used to come, when I was working as like a dean, the students would come to the office, they would say, that teacher, she be tripping, right? Now I understand the language, so I understand that they're saying what? She is always being a bother to me, right?
We see similar phenomenon in the Ebonics command, turn loose and drake down from there. Come down from there. The Ebonics speaker finds it necessary to tell the person to first turn the tree branch loose and then drop down from it. Again, note the tendency to the segment and the action, and more important, the fact that this segmentation appears on the surface in the form of two verbs. For the English speaker, it is sufficient to focus on the main action, falling or dropping from the tree. Another Ebonics example is, I hear tell you went home. I hear that you went home. Again, the Ebonics speaker is found describing every action, and each event is expressed by a single verb. The speaker states that he or she has been hearing a certain thing, but also states on the surface that someone is telling that which is heard. This construction is a clear example of the use of the serial verb. The verbs stand adjacent to each other without being connected. And only one of the verbs can be inflected for tense, whereas if they were simply two sentences, one embedded in the other, both could be inflected for tense. That also holds true for many serial verbs in African languages. Additional variations may yield I heard tell you went home, or I will hear tell if you do that. But inflection of the second verb would yield ungrammatical sentences such as I hear told you went home, or I heard told you went home. If the sentence, as a result of the embedding transformation of some component sentences, were said to be simply I hear it and someone tells or says, producing I hear that someone tells other people, then sentences such as the following could be generated, with either verb or both verbs could be inflected for tense. I hear tell that you went home. I hear it. Somebody told that you went home. I hear it told that you went home. A similar analysis can be made for the sentence I made do with what I had. I used what I had. where only the first verb can be inflected for tense, never the second.
So I know that it's ongoing. It's something I need to investigate. It's something I need to look into. It's something I need to call the teacher about. But if the students come down and say, man, that teacher, she tripping, then I know it's right at that moment. They're saying right now, she is a bother to me. And I can handle it differently. Or, they'll be out on the yard and you hear them say, man, you cheating. They're saying what? You cheating right now. Or they'll like walk away from the game and say, I'm not playing with you because you be cheating. You always cheat. That's how we have to understand the language. Okay, now that's just one rule. There, we do about 30 rules. We do about 30 rules and explain it the way we explain it right now. Let me show you how it looks in the classroom. And then we can end with questions in our remaining moments. This is about a 6-minute clip. This comes from PBS, Do You Speak America? And they came to LA to see how we would do this teaching around the linguistic piece. And this is a 5th grade classroom. I think. Maybe not. I don't know. Sometimes it takes a while to catch up to where I am. So we'll see. Let me see. Let me try it like this. Maybe not. I have a back to school looks in its entirety. It's just that it's a longer clip, right? And we're down to the last 15 minutes. So I'm going to show. Is that something I'm doing? Oh, wait. No?
Various nation builders, people who helped make this country what it is today. One of those people that we've already studied is Ida B. Wells Barnett. So we've already read through the book once, Ida B. Wells Barnett, A Voice Against Violence. What we're going to do today is paired reading. So you are going to get with your partner and you are going to reread an important chapter, chapter 4, which is called The Struggle Against Violence. Now I'm going to review quickly again what's expected of you during paired reading. We started with culture responsive literature, Ida B. Wells Barnett, because we've been studying the nation building unit. And so after I had already read it aloud to them, we went back for a second reread. And so we use reciprocal teaching with the paired reading, where they use questioning, clarifying, summarizing, etc., in order to check for comprehension.
You know how they changed the law? Yeah, and turned away black people was right. No, now I know why she was here. On June 27th, why do people think Ida stopped working? Maybe because she had got married and it was probably difficult to start working since she had a job, but since the baby was born, her work was better.
Okay, one good thing that a good reader does is identify what a character is like by the things that they do or the things that they say. One of our 3rd grade standards is to be able to look what a character says or does and determine their characteristics, their personality traits. So what we did was using the information from Ida B. Wells, since we've already read it once and we reread a part of it, we went back to find adjectives that describe them. So what we are going to do is we are going to think of some adjectives to help describe Ida B. Wells Barnett. Adjectives. We're going to use think, pair, shared. What is an adjective? Think. Once you have it in your mind, go ahead and put your hand on your head to show that you're ready. Okay, turn to your partners. Pair up.
An adjective is something.
Table 4, person 3. That'd be Joshua. What is an adjective?
An adjective is like a word that describes something about a noun.
Okay, so we are going to think of adjectives that describe Ida B. Wells Barnett. And we're going to add them to our bubble map. Because our bubble map is used to do what? Give me a shout out. That's right. That's right. We're using a bubble map to describe something. So in this case, we're describing Ida B. Wells Barnett. So let's go ahead and write our subject in the center. Okay, what you're going to do at this time is you're going to discuss in your group some different adjectives that may describe Ida B. Wells. Now, be thinking about the things that she did in chapter 4 or the things that she may have said in chapter 4, or even the rest of the book. Words that you would use to describe her whole personality, not just how she's feeling at any particular moment. So we're going to use numbered heads together. So when I say go, you're going to do bottoms up, and you're going to decide on one adjective for the group. Go.
Because she didn't stop. She didn't stop working just because she had a baby.
I say silence.
Yeah. And all number 1 is to stand up, please. So for table number 1, Omar, what did you guys come up with as an adjective to describe Ida?
Heroic.
Good, 5-star word. I'm going to go ahead and write that in our bubble map. Okay, what word did you guys come up with?
We came up with unstopping.
Unstopping or unstoppable. Very good, Zalika. There's some love. Nice job. What did your table group come up with? Just. Excellent. Give her some love.
We came up with nice.
Nice. Okay. One of these words doesn't quite fit as nicely as most of them. You guys use some excellent words from your personal thesaurus, some 5-star words. There's one word here that I think we could find some synonyms for, and that would be the word nice. One way we can use the personal thesaurus is to expand the student's own vocabulary. And so we started with the word nice, and then other students added to that word, have a wording concept for it. So we need other words that we add to it. So I want you to think of another word that means the same thing as nice. In order to do this, you're going to use give one, get one, where you're going to get up and give your word, your synonym to somebody, and you're going to get one from them as well. So you should sit back down with at least 2 synonyms for the word nice. Go.
My word that means the same thing as nice is generous. My synonym that means the same word as nice is kind. My synonym for nice is amicable. My synonym for nice is kind.
Now that we've had an opportunity to give one and get one, we're going to share out some answers here. So I'm going to start with roll up. Table 1, person 1. Omar?
Kind.
Kind. Okay, good. Table 2, person 3.
My synonym for nice is courteous.
It is a 5-star word or a high five from afar. Table 5, person 2, Zuri.
My synonym for nice was big-hearted.
Big-hearted. Excellent, Zuri. We came up with some excellent synonyms for the word nice. So we're going to add this to our personal thesaurus. But before we do that, we need to decide what page it is that we're going to turn to in our personal thesaurus. Me, I'm going to turn to N for nice, because that's my easy word. Why would you turn to K in your personal thesaurus, Taylor?
Because kind is what I use at school and with my friends and with my family members.
So that when you go and do your writing and you want to find a synonym for kind, you can look up under K and find all these other 5-star words. Excellent. So once we combined everybody's synonyms for the word nice, then we added that to the personal thesaurus. Now, the reason it's a personal thesaurus is because the students put it under their own word. According to research, vocabulary is one of the primary reasons for students' success or failure. We want to make sure that they have a good repertoire of vocabulary for comprehension purposes, for writing, and for speaking. From there, we want to talk about situational appropriateness in language. Since we do a lot of code switching and a lot of contrastive analysis, one form of that is situational appropriateness, so that not only can they code switch, but they know when and where to do it. In chapter 4, one very important part is when Ida gets to go talk to President McKinley about what's going on in her country. And so some of you have created a role play about situational appropriateness and the languages that she's going to be using. So we're going to start with our introducer, Zalika Jefferson.
This skit is about Ida B. Wells going to President McKinley and talking to him about the lynching going on in her country. It is nice to meet you, President McKinley. My name is Ida B. Wells Barnett, and I came to talk to you, sir, So I just came to talk to you about something horrible that is happening in our country.
Oh, Mrs. Wells Barnett, what is it that you want to talk about?
Did you know that 10,000 black men and women have been lynched since the Civil War?
I'm shocked.
I'm shocked too, President McKinley. And my people should not be treated this way. And I want you to do something to stop this injustice immediately.
I will do everything I can to stop this injustice right away.
Thank you for your help in this matter, President McKinley. Me and my people really need your support. This part of the skit is about Ida going home and talking to her husband Ferdinand about what happened when she went to go talk to President McKinley.
So what happened, Ida?
Well, I talked to President McKinley about the lynching. I told her how Red could put up with it no more.
I'm sure proud of you, Ida. You do a lot for your folks.
Well, I just don't want no black person walking down the street and being lynched just for being black. That ain't right, President, and I gotta do something about it.
I hope President McKinley do something about it too.
Me too, President, me too.
All right, I'm gonna stop it there. What remains is they're gonna talk about which language is appropriate and why do we make the choices that we make. That's what remains. Do some more activities there. But we're almost out of time. We have about 5-6 minutes for questions, comments from the audience, Q&A.
All right, so that pretty much sums up the lecture. When he got into linguistics, I knew exactly which area that he would go to. So what I did was I went over and I grabbed Africanisms in America. Because Ebonics would be touched on and mentioned, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit to show I knew exactly where to go. Like I went directly to the boom, page 67, like to deal with it. Of course, if you have that book, if you read that book, then you would actually know anytime people are talking about Ebonics, you have to give it proper context and understanding. So this is the process of the educational system that could be or could not be. But what he's doing is he's taking into accountability the relatedness of being able to reach children and meet them where they are and tie things back to them to help them advance themselves in certain aspects and areas. This is the conclusion of this particular lecture, as well as the introduction to miseducation of the Negro and Black boys. But hopefully, throughout this particular conversation from yesterday and today, we've learned some things about American culture, Eurocentric timelines, worldviews, and what it actually means to be, quote unquote, an American. For people who's very unfamiliar with what an American is, then you need to look up WASP. That is the identity, the cultural identity of what an American is, and that is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. We struggle there. We struggle with timelines, languages, everything. We're demeaned. Everything that we do, our history is pushed or frowned upon. You have people literally attacking our history out of ignorance. And this falls under the lines of miseducation. It's miseducation. You can't say that you're actually learning something from a conversation that has absolutely no context. It's total miseducation, and it has no methodology provided. They just started reading about the freaking subject matter. We have to be careful, ladies and gentlemen. I understand that people do not like me, and that's absolutely fine. I don't care if you like me or not. That doesn't matter to me. If you could learn something from me matters more. Because even though you don't even like me, I guarantee you that I could probably give you some information that you actually can utilize and apply in your daily life and advance yourself. Then you might like me. But if your wall is up, or you don't like me out of ignorance, you don't like me because I ain't afraid to attack other people's perspectives. They say whatever they want to say. Absolutely, it's their opinion. But when you try to push your opinions in your so-called truths, which aren't, or your hypothesis on a population, I take offense to that. You can't hate me for that, man. I'm defending you. Because if it's something that I know that you don't know and other people don't know, and I go up to defend that, I'm going to defend it in honor of protecting your intelligence or your ignorance, whichever one may come first. But man, I appreciate everybody for tuning in to this particular lecture. Hopefully people can go back and learn a lot from what just transpired and took place. Please, again, remember to like the show, share it with your family members and friends, and enjoy yourself tomorrow. I might be live tomorrow. I might be live Friday, one of those days, but I'm going to try to dedicate some time to just like an open bill. And enjoy the rest of your day.
I don't want to be